Hello, 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 and welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D, brought to you by EM World Live. As always, I am your host, Jessica, and joining this week, we have Andy Boyd from Pandion Games. Thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate being here. This is awesome.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. We're going to be talking about your game, Midnight Muscadines, very shortly, which is the cozy dark TTRPG of Magical Jams. We are recording this live, so if you're watching live, hello, thanks for joining us. You can put any questions you have in the comments and we'll answer them live. And if you're listening to the podcast recording, hello to you too. Anything we're talking about will be linked in the show notes, so you can click through there to find anything we're talking about. So Andy, would you like to introduce yourself and what you do at Pandion Games and how you've been involved with Midnight Muscadines?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the founder and lead game designer of Pandion Games. We founded back in 2021, and I'm kind of the main game writer. And then we bring on like editors and artists and all of that for specific projects. And so for Midnight Muscadines, it was kind of out of nowhere how we started developing this game. And but I'm the main writer basically and designer behind it. And then we also have a team of, I believe, 4 or 5 other people that are also working on it as well.
Fantastic. And so obviously a lot of people play tabletop RPGs, but not everyone goes on to publish and create them, but maybe some people have aspirations. So maybe we could talk a little bit about your journey to getting there. So where did it start? What was your first role-playing game that you played?
Yeah, so the first game I ever played was was actually Pathfinder, first edition.
Oh wow,
and
okay.
A coworker of mine was like, "Hey, I'm trying to figure out how this whole like role playing thing works. Do you want to come over for a game?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." Like, I don't know much about it either. And went over, and after one game, I was completely hooked.
Yeah.
Ended up playing several more games with that coworker, and then I ended up running my own D&D campaign for about 4 years with a core group of players. And we had other players that came in and out. And then we also played like Dread and Mouse Ritter and Tales of the Loop, right? Like, and really got into it. But it wasn't until like COVID hit and I started making kind of my own content for Quest RPG. Which is, I love that RPG. It's super simple. It's beautiful. And I started making like character sheets and cheat guides, you know, so players could have like all the rules at the table kind of thing. And I'd never heard of itch.io before, and I put it up on Itch. And like 3 days later, somebody tipped me $2. And I was like, wait a minute, somebody will give me money for this? This is crazy. And so that kind of started me down the path of like, is this something you could do? And then we ended up publishing our first game while I lived full-time in an RV. We had sold our house, everything that we owned. Like, we were just like, we're done with this. We need to start over.
Okay.
And so I was living in an RV, and I was like, I need a tabletop game that can be played with strangers. So it has to be easy to learn. We're not going to have a table. We might not have good lighting. We're probably going to be sitting around a campfire. And I need something that supports that. And so I ended up designing my first tabletop game for that. So I could just like walk up with a sheet of paper and be like, hey, y'all want to play some horror stories? And that's kind of how I started down the game design path. And then from there, it just kind of slowly built. I mean, I'm happy to go into all of the business aspect, right? There's just tons. But it does reach a point where you go, okay, do I want to do this for a hobby or do I want to do this for a business? Because they're two very different things.
Absolutely.
And I hit that about 2021 is where I was just like, okay, I want to learn how to publish, and I want to like, they're finding the games interesting, at least at the very minimum, they're finding them interesting. And so I think I could do something with this. I worked with a development editor early on where I was basically like, I need you to edit my game, but I also want you to teach me how to write games because you know how to do that. And so I worked with them for about 6 months, give or take, on and off, where they were basically just asking me leading questions like, why did you write it like this? Why do you have a whole chapter get dedicated to these things? Have you thought about this? Here's resources, go read this. And that's really how I really dug deep into like game design.
Sounds really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, if you had one bit of advice, I mean, obviously there's so much, we could have the entire podcast episode talking about this, but I do want to get on and talk about the game. But do you have, if somebody was looking to do that, make the leap, and instead of it being a hobby, make it kind of what they do for work, what one bit of advice would you give to them, or like a top line kind of message about it?
Find a niche and start making a catalog of games, a catalog of things. If you and release something, release anything. You can always go back and iterate on it and improve it later. But start making a catalog. If you just have one game or one thing that you're trying to sell, it's very, very difficult. Whereas if you have 10 smaller games that perhaps interest, different groups of people, because like one's horror and one's cozy and one's this and one's that. It's a lot easier to find people that are interested in maybe giving you a shot and hearing about you.
I like that advice very much. Thank you. I will apologize for my voice partway through. I was off sick last week, which is why we had no episode. So I'm still a little bit recovering from that mode. So people watching the live had a lovely audio freeze frame of me coughing, which is always delightful. You're spared from it on the podcast. But anyway, let's move us on. Let us talk about Midnight Muscadines. So yeah, so if nobody's heard of this, why don't you give us the intro? What is this game about?
This is a game about making magical jam and preserving magic and going out and finding the last source of magic in the world so your way of life can continue. And so it's this kind of juxtaposition of like cozy, illuminated, warm setting, and then also striking out into the dark. And it's almost post-apocalyptic, setting where the sun has been shattered and the magic is dying out, and you're still trying to find the last remnants of it to preserve it into jam. But it's also jam. It's also magical jam and little jam jars that you carry around on your belt, and that's super cute, and I love it.
Yeah. It's incredibly cozy. The first time I heard the name, I heard it and I thought it was like jam as in like music. I was like, oh, it's gonna be music magic. And I read it and I was like, oh no, like jam as in like jelly, as people would say, things like that. And I was like, I'm even more interested. So where did the idea for this come from?
So this is one of those things that started on social media where somebody says one thing. So a couple of Drakes, Sean and Navi Drake, they challenged me for the Songs and Sagas game jam hosted by Fire RPGs. And they were like, what if we both made a game about jam for the game jam, and then just see kind of like how different they become? And I was like, you're on, let's go. And everything else on my plate just got completely pushed to the side. And I was like, how do we do this? Like, this is so cool. And so it really started around this idea of just like, we have magical jam, and the entire game started with what's the game mechanic for making cool and interesting jams with ingredients. And so that's kind of where it all started from. And then I was also, as just a world building exercise, working on an entire world on the side, and which was this shattered sun and sun shards and the wilder night and all of that. And while I was working on this, I was like, these two pair together perfectly. This is perfect. And so it just all kind of fell in line and came together.
Fantastic. Well, the game was successfully funded on BackerKit. Congratulations. So it's definitely happening. And pre-order options are available now. So if you are watching or listening, you can go to pandiangames.com/Muscadines or Muscadines, sorry, and pre-order it there. And I think your plans are to have it shipped November this year. Yes. So it's not a very long wait crowdfunder, which is really nice. Because I know sometimes...
This is actually like our longest wait that we've asked our backers to do. So like, I'm a little nervous about it because I'm like, no, I want it out like now. So our last crowdfunding campaign, we finished the campaign, and 4 weeks later we were basically shipping it out. So we like to usually have everything done ahead of time. But this game's so big I think we're over 70,000 words. It's going to be over 200 pages long.
Wow.
It's so big where we're like, we're going to get like 80% of it done ahead of the campaign and then finish it up afterwards. So that's what we're working on now.
Fantastic. Well, I didn't realize the book was going to be that big. I've got a little kind of press preview version that's got a sampling of things. So, I mean, that sounds fantastic. Let's dig into what's going to be inside the book then. So we've had a little bit of a settings and the ideas kind of behind it. But if we sit down to play the game, how mechanically does the game work? I've got a picture of the character sheet up on the screen as well. But what are we actually doing? It's dice, it's cards. What's going on?
Yeah, so it is both dice and cards, and kind of how it works is everything, instead of being like a modifier, everything has a die value. So a 4-sided dice, a 6-sided dice, 8-sided dice, et cetera, et cetera. And you're always going to roll 2 dice together against some sort of target number. So we call it the difficulty rating. And so you set the difficulty rating, you choose your 2 dice, and we'll get into how and why you would choose the 2 different dice. And then you roll them together, and that's the minimum. We have the ability for people to be able to roll additional dice on top of that to improve their scores and things like that. The cards come into play in order for players to power themselves to do really cool things. So on a setback, so when you basically don't succeed at a roll, you're able to gather cards into your hands, and then you can burn those cards, basically discarding them, to add dice to your pool. Or so, for instance, you could roll an additional impact die, say that the magic that you're casting becomes more powerful in some way, and you would describe that narratively, burn the card, and now you get to roll 2 of the dice instead of just 1 of them. You can do the same thing with your protection. So if you want to mitigate damage or harm upon yourself, you can describe how you're going to do that, burn a card, and go. And it's also used to do things like improve add ingredients to your magic. So you're going to burn cards to add ingredients. You're going to burn cards, right? It is a resource for you to use. And I like it because you get them on setbacks. So by failing at things, you get these cards that make you more powerful, that allow you to do additional options. So rolling poorly doesn't feel crappy. You're actually like, "Ooh, I've got really cool things that I can do now. I'm going to now that I've got 10 cards because the dice have been against me, I'm going to take the dice out of dice jail because I actually want all these cards." And then now you can just start burning cards, and you could burn all 10 of them in one check in one scene and just become a superhero for an instant. And then all your cards are gone, and you got to be really crappy again to get them all back.
I mean, what was the reason you chose to kind of integrate a variety of dice and kind of and cards as well into the mechanics? So what kind of led you to that design choice?
Yeah, so the base system is based on Songs and Sagas, and so Songs and Sagas uses the polyhedral dice assignments to your skills and things like that. And I also am a big fan of the Breathless system, and the Breathless system also uses these dice assignment. And so a lot of my games that do use dice, because some of my games don't, very much are you assign a die size, they can step up, they can step down. So a D6 can become a D8, or if it's doesn't work as well, it can become a a D4 or things like that. And I really like how that shows kind of how we'll get into this, but the impact dice. It's how impactful either your actions or an item or a spell is on the specific situation that you're trying to overcome. And it has a baseline, D6, D8, whatever. But if it's more impactful, you can step it up, and that's a good representation. Or if it's less impactful, you then step it down. And so I just think I think it's a really cool way to kind of shift and mechanically show the weaknesses and strengths.
Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, we've somebody's commented in the chat that they've already played twice. as a game master and really loved it.
I know who. Hello.
So people are already enjoying the game. One thing I found really interesting as well is you have different modes of playing this game. So you can play a GM-led game, you can play GM-less, there's a duet version and a solo version. So that's like quite a tall order from one system. What made you want to take that approach of having that mass variety?
So I don't know the exact number, but a large number of our games are solo games, or what I call solo plus games. So they're solo designed, but can be GM'd. And so when I was going into this, our last game that we just made was solo plus, and it was a really great success. People really seemed to enjoy it. You know, I'm not going to say it's a great game. I'm going to let other people say that if they want to. But I really like this idea of the solo plus, where you can play solo and as a group, because it really opens things up. And kind of we had to tweak the system of Songs and Sagas to be able to support that. And basically what it is the players are doing everything. They make all of the rolls. They make the rolls on behalf of the creatures. And the GM is really now just there to interpret the results of what the characters are doing and then narrate. And so now that the GM is kind of a facilitator, a narrator of events, that role can now be with anybody. It doesn't actually have to be with a specific person that does nothing else. And so that really opens up the ability to say, hey, as a solo player, you get to narrate. You're already doing everything the same mechanically. It's just now you're also narrating, and here's a bunch of tables and oracles and ways to roll if you get stuck with how to narrate or what to do next. We give you a bunch of tools. And if we give tools like that to the solo player, the duet players are going to also be able to take advantage of that. And what we just described was literally GM-less play. Yeah. So just by making the GM a narrator only, that kind of opens up what it is that we can do.
That makes perfect sense. Like you say, the relationship between solo GM-less and GM-led, can be, I see how that works. I mean, obviously we talked through there mechanically what that does to the game, but what does that do to the feel of playing? Because I feel it's always a very different experience playing a solo game compared to when I'm playing collaboratively with other people. So what does that look like when we're playing Midnight Muscadines?
Yeah, so it is quite a bit different. In Substratum Protocol, we actually had you still lead a team when you played solo. So you had all these characters, but in Midnight Muscadines, you still just play your one character. Now we do have rules for having companions and mounts and stuff like that. But it does shift. And what we do is we give the solo player these options for, options. We codified all of the tasks that the GM does, and we call them mentor prompts now. And so the solo player can basically, as they're sitting there writing, and be like, oh, like, what is something interesting that a GM would do right now? And they can look at this table and be like, oh, okay, they're going to raise the stakes. How would I raise the stakes in this moment? Maybe I'll roll on this table and add a complication. So it is a bit more, by yourself and creative writing and that kind of thing, compared to sitting around a large table with a bunch of friends and hooting and hollering and laughing and, talking over each other. So that does change. But we basically built out an entire section or chapter in the game that is just a toolkit for solo play, to give people those options.
Fantastic. I mean, I think it would be good to dig into the mechanics a little bit more, like you're talking about the risk and impact die, but we haven't yet touched on the characters, so who we're playing in this world. So maybe if you do a little intro into who are we going to be when we step into this world.
Yes, so you play as Marmoteers, and Marmoteers are specialists in finding and preserving Midnight Muscadines, these grapes that are containing the last source of concentrated magic. And you're a specialist, but the Marmoteers is just a guild. And so when you're not out harvesting and preserving magic, you have a day job essentially. And so you, as a character, you might be, we renamed them recently, but you might be a forager, you might be a hunter, you might be a beekeeper, right? And you have all of these other backgrounds that you might come from, the Wanderlustian, and you bring those skills of your day job to the Marmoteers to then strike out and go on these adventures and get into the Wildernite safely and make your way through. And so, you know, your character can come from a many different backgrounds, but at the start of the game, we're all Marmoteers, we're all part of the same guild, and we're all interested in going out and helping preserve the magic of the world.
Beautiful. Well, that leads us into talking about magical jam, like the spells, the magic in the world. So tell us about magic in the world, and what does creating the magical jam look like?
Yeah, so the magic system is one. So Pandian Games, for those who don't know, Pandian Games, we make a lot of narrative focused games where we try to take emphasis off of combat. It's not combat free games, but we try to take the emphasis off of it.
Sure.
And our magic, I wanted it to be a really interesting narrative magic and spell creation system. And so each of the ingredients that you could add to your jam jar to make a magical spell has a magical ability, and then it also has its description. And when you first put in your first ingredient, it's just going to be that ingredient. That's the magic that you get. But as you add additional ingredients, you can take all of the words, the physical words in the book of the magic and the description of the current jam plus the new jam, and mix them around to make a new spell effect. So imagine all of the like if you have the refrigerator magnet words, right? Everybody knows that, right? And you like switch them around to like make new sentences. It's that, except for spells. And then as you add more ingredients, you can add up to 4 to your jam jar. You take the old spell and add the new ingredient, mix those together to do something else. And we didn't want to have to provide a huge, massive list of spells for this, right? Because I think there's like 250,000 different combinations with the 2 ingredients. And so we were like, you know, we trust players. That's something big with Pandian Games. We trust players to be part of the story and build the story. And so that's the narrative effect. So those are things like, you know, can you influence a being's attitude? Can you, prevent or, make nightmares occur? Can you counter resurrections, right? Those are narrative effects. And then it all comes back to that impact die for how strong the spell is. So if you have 1 ingredient, it's a D6. If it's 2 ingredients, it starts at a D8. And then when you actually go to use it, you can be like, this is impactful, this is really impactful, or this is, least effective, right? Think the Pokemon terms. And that's when you can step your die up and down. But, the die that it starts at depends on how many ingredients are in there.
Fantastic. And on the character sheet, let's talk a little bit about character creation, what goes into it, because on the character sheet, you've got space for attributes, your inventory, your abilities, and then you have an actual jam jar. So the jam jar is very interesting to me. So how does that work mechanically on your character sheet?
Yeah, so when you add your first ingredient to your jam, you can add it to any spell slot. So you'll see on the jam jar there are suit icons, so hearts, diamonds, clubs, and spades. You can add it to any slot, and you just write it in. And then when you go to add an additional ingredient, you have to have a card in your hand of an unused slot. So then you can burn that and then add it. And because you're getting a more powerful spell, you're altering the spell, so we wanted it to be one where it's like, you need to put some thought into it. And so that is kind of how that works mechanically. And then as those slots filled up, you then increase the jam die.
Fantastic. And looking at creating characters as well, like how long is that process, and how beginner friendly is this? Is this the game to bring to my friends that haven't played RPGs, or is this something for my friends that game a lot?
It is definitely more for your friends that have not. I mean, it also works. With this system, we really wanted to be like, it's super, super beginner friendly, but for the people that really like turning the dials and tweaking their characters, that's there too, but you don't have to interact with it. And so with character creation, you select your background, and that basically tells you what your attributes and max endurance are going to be. It's going to set a basic protection die for you. It's going to give you abilities. You're going to create your first spell, which again is narrative based, right? You're just going to be like, okay, well, it's a D6, right? For like mathematics wise. You're going to create or just add an item to your inventory. And with the campaign, we actually unlocked playable folk as well. So folk are the different species in the world. So there's not going to be 10. There's 10 of those. We actually just finished all of the writing for them last week.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it was a lot. But that gives you some additional things like questions to answer to help build out your background. It gives you additional abilities to use as well. So instead of just starting with 2 abilities, you now have 5 abilities. And then you have, your guild, and then your name, pronouns, style, and quirk. And those are really just to add flavor to your character. And I think they're fun. The style and quirk concept started where basically it's a description. It's more how would I say it? Like, are you an endless hummer? Do you have fidgeting hands? You're an unintentional rhymer, things like that. And so it's just kind of these fun quirks, and like your style might be like, are you a hermit or a sage, or are you a vagabond bard that's traveling around, right? And we give some descriptions of what that is. And so it's very much building character rather than building, a stat sheet.
Great. I love that. So if we're sitting down to kind of play a game, how do we kind of structure it? Now, obviously, I assume there's a different structure to a solo game opposed to a game where we're playing collaboratively together. So could we talk through maybe, how we'd structure a game session?
Yeah. So the game loop defined in the solo section is kind of what GMs use already. We just kind of put it in as steps. But that said, really, the game session is you're going to strike out on an adventure of some sort. You're going to encounter 3 to 5 different obstacles in some way, whether that's a creature or challenges that you have to overcome, or adversaries that you need to defeat or at least get around. And the main goal, at least at the beginning of the game, usually your first session is going to be, let's harvest some midnight muscadines and bring it back to our home, and basically return as heroes, right? And that's going to be the first kind of outing that a lot of people have with the game. But the game is going to include 3 kind of larger adventures, and that includes going out for finding midnight muscadines, and there's a political intrigue one, and I'm working with the Drakes for another, and I think that's going to be a race. We're going to have 5 mysteries. So mysteries are more open-ended, collect clues kind of around wherever you're at. There's something unfolding. And then we also are going to have this unique kind of mystery, like one-shot thing that's festivals, because everybody loves a shopping episode. Everybody loves festival episodes. And so we've kind of put that together in like a one-shot adventure kind of thing. And there's going to be 5 of them that are included in the book. And it is like, here's what actually goes on at the festivals. Here's events that occur. Here's drama that's unfolding, and you need to respond to the drama. So it's very focused on just the festival itself.
Nice. I love that. So this the game can be played kind of as a campaign, like you mentioned. There's a whole string of adventures there, and there is kind of character advancement that happens. So what does character advancement look like in the game?
So character advancement, there's actually two ways to advance your character. One is through XP. So when you roll a success, you fill up an XP track, and when that fills, you can then gain one of four possible bonuses to your character, and that's such as adding a modifier to an attribute, to an item, adding a modifier like a +1 to your rolls, to your protection, things like that. And then the second one is a kind of a narrative experience point that we call renown. And it's basically as you accomplish things in the world, at the end of the session, you'll be granted a certain amount of renown. And then you can spend those points to gain kind of larger things, such as if you want a second jam jar, so now you can craft 2 separate spells at a time.
Oh,
You need to do that through your renown advancement. You can gain a new ability. So there's 40 additional abilities in the book that are just locked behind advancement. And so there's abilities that you can do. You can make one of your items more powerful. You can influence a guild. So every guild in the game has agendas that they're trying to accomplish and things that they're trying to do. And part of your advancement might be we're actually going to push a guild to do one of those things or stop them from doing one of those things. You can gain inventory slots. So the inventory slot system is something that players will want to focus on because you have your items in there, but that's also where you can take negative conditions. And this is anything from becoming waterlogged or becoming sick or injured or things like that, and they consume inventory slots. And if you don't have an inventory slot left, it starts kicking your items out and you lose items. So you can, so you can start adding inventory slots so you can actually take on more conditions without losing your items. So all sorts of things like that is kind of how players advance. So adding modifiers. They can also step up, with renown, they can step up an attribute as well. So if they have a D4 attribute, they could say, hey, I want this to be a D6 because nothing should be at D4. It's terrifying. They can do that.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I like there's some options with it, and it's almost giving your character kind of breadth and a bit more interesting other options opposed to just gaining more and more levels and more power points, as it were. So it's giving them new and interesting choices and things to do. So that sounds super fun. Also, for people listening to the podcast, you can't see the character sheet on screen. Everything is little jam jars, which is very cute. Even the experience track points are little jars and everything like that. I love the visual design that you've got for this because it's very aesthetic but also very functional. Could you talk a little bit about what you wanted the game to visually be? Because I know there's been huge amounts of effort in the artwork and the layout and the style of it. So I'd love to give you some space to talk about that.
Yeah, so Galen Peugeot is our artist, and when I first reached out to him and he was like, "Hey, this is actually going to be a big game. Are you interested in working on this?" We sat down and kind of hammered out how we wanted the design to go, and so we leaned more like JRPG, like old school, like old Final Fantasy, Sea of Stars kind of direction with it all. While also keeping a very limited color palette. So one of the things that we've always done in my games is the colors that I lay out for, put into layout are usually the only colors that are then used in the artwork. And I usually have about 4 to 5 different colors. And so Galen we went back and forth with sketches and stuff like that to really dial in, character design, kind of how they work. It's a semi-modern setting as well, so it's not completely. It's like Final Fantasy, right? Like it's still somewhat modern. It's not like medieval. Everything like there's some really cool. Like different clothing options and stuff like that going on. even in the setting, we talk about how they're using fallen stars and water wheels now to get rudimentary electricity and stuff like that. And so a lot of the artwork kind of hopefully captures this like transitionary period where it's like it's still very fantasy, but getting more modern.
Fab. I love that. And I love the approach, like you said, to the color choices and the way it's laid out. Also, the layout is really I think accessible is the word I want to use. I'm not sure if that's the right thing, but when I was reading through, it didn't feel overwhelming. Like there's going to be a lot of pages and a lot of information there, but the way it's laid out does guide you through really nicely. Like just for example, the edge of the page had a certain color for solo mode, so I knew how big that section was and how that worked. So there's really been a lot of love and thought put into the game. So yeah, it's a beautiful product. So I'm sure people are very excited to get their hands on a physical copy. Yeah, I mean, as we've mentioned, the game is fully funded. So you've done your crowdfunding, so it's in production. It's being made now, as you've mentioned.
Yes.
If you are watching or listening, you can go and pre-order it now as well if you're interested. So you can pick up a copy in November 2025. Because the best way to support indie tabletop creators is to buy their stuff if you are able to. But Andy, thank you so much for coming on and talking about Midnight Muscadines. Congratulations on the funding. And I'm so pleased that development's going well and that you're all on track for fulfillment. That's great to hear.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you again for having us on. It is a blast.
Absolutely. I always love hearing about other people's games. Before you go, I do have a question though, and that is,
Yes.
do you have any other recommendations for any other tabletop games? And the rules are it can't be a game that you've made. And of course it can't be D&D because this is not D&D.
It's not D&D. Perfect.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this because thankfully you warned me, and it is, I think I will go with Song of the Scriptworm. It's a solo game. So we've been big on solo games. It's by Almost Bedtime Theater, and it is such a beautifully laid out game. It is about an infinite, ever-changing great library, and it's absolutely fantastic. I highly recommend Song of the Scriptworm and anything made by Almost Bedtime Theater. You can check them out on itch.io, and I think they're at IPR as well, Indie Press Revolution. Yeah, highly recommend.
Perfect. That's a great recommendation. Thank you so much. Thank you again so much for coming on, and congratulations on the success of the game. Looking forward to seeing what other games you have in the future as well, because I'm sure you have other things in the work that you're already planning on doing in the future. So maybe we can have you back to talk about those. And thank you to everyone who watched and listened. We'll be back next week with another indie tabletop RPG to share with you next Monday. But for now, we'll say thank you very much and goodbye. Good night. Bye.